There's a state in America the size of a postage stamp. 624,000 people. More cows than residents for most of its history. More maple trees than most countries have forests. Vermont produces more maple syrup than any other state in America. It invented one of the most recognized ice cream brands on earth. It put soft serve on the map under a name nobody else uses. And it figured out, centuries before anyone else, that you could pour hot syrup over snow and eat it. 10 dishes this state doesn't just make, it owns. Sap, fire, time. 3 things. One of the oldest food traditions in North America. The Abenaki people were tapping sugar maple trees in what is now Vermont long before Europeans arrived. They made V-shaped cuts in the bark, collected the running sap in birch bark vessels, and concentrated it over fire. When French explorer Nicolas Denis wrote about the maple trees in 1672, he called the sap a beverage very pleasing to drink. Thomas Jefferson purchased 50 pounds of Vermont maple sugar in 1790 and used it exclusively as his sweetener. During the Civil War, abolitionist Vermonters chose maple sugar over cane sugar, specifically because cane was produced by enslaved labor. Vermont's maple sugar was a political act as much as a food. Vermont has led the United States in maple production every year since 1916. In 2024, Vermont sugar makers produced a record 3.1 million gallons. The state has 6.65 million maple taps. It contributes nearly half the nation's supply and roughly 5.5% of the world's. The season lasts 4 to 6 weeks in late winter. Freezing nights and thawing days create the pressure that moves sap through the tree. In 1981, a retired maple marketing specialist for the Vermont Department of Agriculture named C. Blake Roy had an idea. The Rutland County maple producers were selling vanilla creamees at the Vermont State Fair. Blake Roy suggested they add maple syrup to the mix. Wilson Bill Clark and RCMP President Truman Young brought a few gallons of B-grade maple syrup to Tom Seward at Seward's Dairy in Rutland. Seward added the syrup to his soft serve mix at the end of the pasteurization process. The maple creemee was born. The name creemee predates the maple version. A soft serve franchise called Creemee opened in Brattleboro in 1952 and spread across Vermont through the 1950s. Like Kleenex for tissues, the brand name became the universal term. Soft serve in Vermont is a creemee. It has been for 70 years. But the maple creemee, the one made with real Vermont maple syrup, no artificial flavoring, the flavor that Vermonters wait for all winter. That is 1981. That is Rutland County. That is a retired agriculture official and a dairy and a state fair stand. Vermont has no Dairy Queen, no Carvel, not a single location of either chain in the entire state. Vermonters want their creemee. Creemee stands open in April and May when the syrup is fresh. The quickest way to start an argument in Vermont is to declare where the best maple creemee can be found. On May 5, 1978, 2 childhood friends from Long Island opened an ice cream shop in a renovated gas station in downtown Burlington, Vermont. Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield had taken a $5 correspondence course in ice cream making from Penn State. They had $12,000 between them, $4,000 each from savings, $4,000 from a bank loan. Ben's father paid half of Ben's share. They were 27 years old. They had no food industry experience. They had no idea what they were doing. Ben had severe anosmia, no sense of smell. He relied entirely on texture and mouthfeel to judge what he was eating. This is why Ben and Jerry's ice cream has chunks, big chunks, nuts, cookies, brownie pieces, candy. Because Ben couldn't smell anything, he needed something to feel. The entire company's identity, every chunky, maximalist, overloaded flavor, came from one founder's medical condition. In 1981, Time magazine ran a cover story calling Ben & Jerry's the best ice cream in the world. In 1984, Haagen-Dazs tried to block Ben & Jerry's distribution in Boston. Ben & Jerry's responded with a campaign asking, "What's the doughboy afraid of?" The fight went national. Ben & Jerry's won. The factory in Waterbury became the second most visited tourist attraction in Vermont, after the Shelburne Museum. In 2000, Unilever bought the company for $326 million. The original gas station was long gone, demolished for a parking lot. Ben and Jerry were made whole. Vermont remained the spiritual home of the company. The factory is still in Waterbury. The flavor graveyard, where discontinued flavors are buried with headstones, is still there. Cherry Garcia. Vermont cheddar is not a single cheese. It is a family of cheeses ranging from mild and creamy to sharp enough to make your jaw ache, aged from a few months to several years, made by farms that in some cases have been operating since before the Civil War. Cabot Creamery was founded in 1919 as a farmers' cooperative in Cabot, Vermont. It is still a cooperative. Over 800 farm families own it. Their sharp cheddar has won more gold medals at the World Cheese Championship than any other American cheddar. Cabot is not the only Vermont cheddar. Grafton Village Cheese has been operating since 1892. Shelburne Farms makes a raw milk cheddar aged 1, 2, or 3 years that is a different food at each interval. The sharp Vermont cheddar, the aged version, the one with the clean acid finish that makes your tongue pay attention, is the standard against which most American cheddar is measured. It appears in Vermont on everything: in apple pie, in soup, in the queso that Vermonters deny is queso because queso is Tex-Mex and this is Vermont. Sliced cold with crackers, melted over a burger, dropped into a bowl of chili. The Cabot Cooperative exists because dairy farmers needed to pool their surplus milk and do something useful with it. Cheddar was the answer. Apple cider donuts exist everywhere now. Farmers markets in California, orchards in Georgia, grocery stores in suburban Ohio. Vermont is not where apple cider donuts were invented, but Vermont is where the apple cider donut became an institution, where it means something specific, where the orchard matters, where the cider is pressed that morning and the donut is fried while you watch. The Vermont version. Fresh pressed apple cider, reduced and concentrated, mixed into the dough along with cinnamon, nutmeg, and allspice. Fried or baked, rolled in cinnamon sugar while still hot. Eaten within an hour, ideally within 20 minutes. Not shipped, not frozen, not reheated. Cold hollow. Cider Mill in Waterbury has been making them since the 1970s. They press cider in a rack and cloth press that is visible through the window. The donuts sell out by early afternoon every fall weekend. People come specifically for the donuts and leave with gallons of cider and the specific contentment of eating something made by hand in the place where the apples were grown. Apple cider donut season is September and October. Vermont's apple harvest and Vermont's fall foliage arrive simultaneously. This is not a coincidence. Vermont has a cheese that most Americans have never heard of and that no one outside of Vermont has been able to fully replicate. Crowley Cheese in Healdville has been making cheese continuously since 1882. It is the oldest cheese company in America. Their cheese, a washed curd cheddar made by hand using techniques unchanged since the 19th century, is simultaneously sharper and milder than conventional cheddar, with a texture that is more open and crumbly. It is made in small batches. It does not advertise. It sells primarily by mail order and from the factory itself. This is Vermont's relationship to food in a sentence. The best version of something, made quietly, sold locally, not particularly interested in explaining itself to you. Vermont has more breweries per capita than any state in the United States. This fact arrives suddenly if you are driving through Vermont for the first time and notice that every small town, Stowe, Waterbury, Burlington, Middlebury, Morrisville, has at least one. The Alchemist opened in Waterbury in 2003. In 2011, they released Heady Topper, a double IPA canned in 16-ounce cans with instructions printed on the side telling drinkers to consume directly from the can. Heady Topper became one of the most sought-after beers in America. People drove from New York and Boston on release days. Bottle shops rationed it. It appeared on Best Beer in the World lists before most beer drinkers had ever seen a can. The Vermont craft beer scene that grew up around The Alchemist, Hill Farmstead, Lawson's Finest Liquids, and dozens of others invented what the industry calls the New England IPA. Hazy, soft, low bitterness, tropical fruited, the opposite of the aggressively bitter West Coast IP, as that had dominated the style before. The hazy IPA is now the most popular style of craft beer in America. It came from Vermont. From a state with 624,000 people and more breweries per person than anywhere else, Vermont is the only state in America without a McDonald's in its largest city. Burlington, Vermont's biggest city, has no McDonald's. There is no Dunkin', no chain coffee shop of any kind in the downtown core. This is not an accident. It is a policy. Vermont has some of the most aggressive local business protection ordinances in the country. Chains face zoning restrictions. Local businesses get preference. The result is a food culture built almost entirely on independent restaurants, local farms, and regional producers. The Vermont fresh-pressed burger, made from local beef, served at one of dozens of independent burger joints, is not a single dish. It is a category. Church Street in Burlington has been lined with independent restaurants since before most American cities thought to preserve their downtown cores. The Burlington Farmers Market, running since 1981, is one of the most vibrant in New England. Maple syrup, cheddar, apples, cider, beer, beef, cheese, all of it local, all of it within an hour of the table. Vermont doesn't shout about its food. It doesn't have a famous restaurant district or a celebrity chef on a magazine cover. It has sugar houses and cider mills and creemee stands that open in May and close in September and have been there since before anyone now working in them was born. What Vermont has is geography and stubbornness, the right trees, the right soil, the right cold. A population that decided, collectively and repeatedly, that local was not a trend. It was the only option. Not every state produces half the nation's maple syrup from a landmass smaller than most American counties. Not every state invented a style of beer that took over an entire industry. Not every state has been making the same cheddar in the same way since 1882 and sees no reason to change. Vermont does things its own way. Has since the Abenaki showed the first settlers how to tap a tree. The food is the proof. 10 dishes this state doesn't just make, it owns. Stay curious. Vermont doesn't shout about its food. It doesn't have a famous restaurant district or a celebrity chef on a magazine cover. It has sugar houses and cider mills and creemee stands that open in May and close in September and have been there since before anyone now working in them was born. What Vermont has is geography and stubbornness. The right trees, the right soil, the right cold. A population that decided, collectively and repeatedly, that local was not a trend. It was the only option. Not every state produces half the nation's maple syrup from a landmass smaller than most American counties. Not every state invented a style of beer that took over an entire industry. Not every state has been making the same cheddar in the same way since 1882 and sees no reason to change. Vermont does things its own way. Has since the Abenaki showed the first settlers how to tap a tree. The food is the proof. 10 dishes this state doesn't just make, it owns. Stay curious.